asking why his father didn't want him. 17 million people watched, including the billionaire who'd abandoned his mother before the boy was born and never knew he existed. Carl Robinson saw his own face staring back at him from the thumbnail. Same green eyes, same sharp jaw, same last name he'd whispered to a woman named Angeline 16 years ago before walking away because his startup mattered more than love. Now his son's voice was breaking through his penthouse speakers. Maybe I just wasn't enough for him to stay. And Carl knew with a certainty that shattered everything, this was his reckoning. Paul Henson didn't plan to cry on camera. He'd practiced the script in his head 17 times during the bus ride home from school. He'd set up his phone on the stack of textbooks, adjusted the lighting with his desk lamp, and told himself this was just a project for Mrs. Chen's media literacy class. Nothing major. Just a 3-minute video about a social issue that matters to you. But when he pressed record and opened his mouth, his throat closed up. Because talking about absent fathers, when you've spent 16 years wondering why yours never wanted to meet you, that hits different when the red dot is blinking. Paul swallowed hard. Started over. Hi, I'm Paul, and I want to talk about something nobody really talks about. What it's like growing up when your dad just isn't there. His voice was steady. Good, he could do this. Not because he died. Not because of divorce or distance, but because before you were even born, he decided he didn't want to know you. And you spend your whole life wondering, was it something about me? Was I not enough? Did he look at my mom and think, I don't want a kid with her? Paul's hands were shaking now. He gripped the edge of his desk. You watch other kids at soccer games, and their dads are cheering. You see Father's Day posts online, and you just scroll past. You lie when teachers ask what your parents do because saying, I only have a mom, opens up questions you don't want to answer. He paused. The silence felt heavy, holy. And the worst part? You start believing maybe you weren't worth staying for. Maybe if you'd been different, better, more, he wouldn't have left. Paul's voice cracked. He didn't edit it out. At 11:43 p.m., he uploaded the video with the title, Why Didn't My Dad Want Me? And went to bed thinking maybe 12 people would watch it. By 6 a.m., the number was 340,000. By 8 a.m., it hit 2 million. By noon, Paul's phone was on fire. What Paul didn't know was that his video was about to change more than just view counts. It was about to rewrite 3 lives completely. 643 miles away, Carl Robinson was not a man who cried. He'd survived a childhood with a father who measured love in profit margins. He'd built Robinson Tech from a failing startup into a $3.2 billion empire. He'd fired executives, crushed competitors, and signed deals that reshaped entire industries, all before his 40th birthday. Emotion was a distraction. Sentiment was weakness. That's what his father taught him. And Carl believed it. Until 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when his assistant forwarded him a viral video with a subject line, Sir, you need to see this. Carl almost deleted it. He had a board meeting in 2 hours, a merger presentation, quarterly projections to review. But something made him click. The thumbnail loaded, and Carl's world stopped. On the left side of the screen, a teenage boy with dark, curly hair, green eyes sharp as glass, a jawline that could have been chiseled from Carl's own reflection. On the right side, Carl's official headshot from the Robinson Tech website. The algorithm had paired them for engagement. Clickbait. Viral teen versus billionaire CEO, watch what happens. But it wasn't clickbait. It was prophecy. Carl's finger hovered over the play button. His chest felt tight, like someone had reached inside and squeezed. He pressed play. Paul's voice poured through the speakers, young, raw, breaking in all the places Carl had spent decades hardening. Why didn't my dad want me? Carl's breath caught. The boy's face, the cadence of his speech, the way his left eyebrow lifted slightly when he was fighting tears. Carl's mother used to say, he did the same thing. But it was the name in the description that made Carl's coffee cup slip from his hand. The ceramic shattered against his marble floor, expensive Ethiopian blend spreading like a stain. Posted by Paul Henson. Henson. Carl's mind flashed back 16 years. Angeline Henson. The woman with paint-stained fingers and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. The nursing student who stayed up with him during all-nighters when his startup was hemorrhaging money and his father was threatening to cut him off. The woman who believed in him when no one else did. The woman he left because he was 23, terrified, and convinced that love would destroy everything he was building. He could still see her face, the last time they spoke, the way she'd reached for his hand across the coffee shop table, voice trembling. "Carl, I need to tell you something. I've been feeling..." And he'd pulled away. "Angeline, I can't do this right now. The company's failing. My father's pulling funding. I need to focus. I can't." She'd gone pale, nodded slowly. "So that's it? We're done? I'm sorry. You deserve better than someone who's drowning." She left the coffee shop. He never called. He told himself it was the right choice, the responsible choice. He built his empire, proved his father wrong, became untouchable. And he never asked what Angeline had wanted to tell him that day. Now, staring at Paul's face frozen on his screen, Carl knew. She'd been trying to tell him she was pregnant. And what happened next would change everything Carl thought he knew about success, about fatherhood, about what it means to show up when it matters most. Carl replayed the video. Once, twice, 7 times. Each replay carved deeper. You start believing maybe you weren't worth staying for. Paul's voice echoed in Carl's penthouse, too large, too empty, too perfectly curated to hide the fact that Carl Robinson had spent 16 years building monuments to success, while his son grew up believing he wasn't wanted. Carl's mistake, but he couldn't stop himself. At Jessica M., 2009. This broke my heart. Where are the fathers who just leave? At Truth Hurts 88. That CEO in the thumbnail probably has a dozen kids he doesn't know about. At Danny R. Paul, you are enough. Your dad missed out. Period. 17 million views. Replatform. The video had become a movement. And Carl, the man in the thumbnail, the billionaire CEO, the absent father, had no idea his son existed until the internet told him. Now here's what you need to understand about moments like this. When a man spends 16 years running from his past, he convinces himself it's buried, gone, irrelevant. But the past doesn't stay buried. It waits. And when it surfaces, it takes everything with it. Carl stood up from his desk, legs unsteady. His assistant knocked. "Mr. Robinson, the car's ready for your meeting." Carl's voice came out hoarse. "Cancel it." "Sir? Cancel everything today, tomorrow, the rest of the week." Silence. "Is everything all right?" Carl looked at Paul's face on the screen, 16 years old, brilliant, broken, and unmistakably his. "No," Carl whispered. "Nothing's all right." He grabbed his coat. His assistant called after him. "Where are you going?" Carl didn't answer. But in his mind, one thought looped endlessly. Paul Henson, Angeline Henson, the Meadows District. He'd find them. He'd find his son. And then, God help him, he'd have to explain why he wasn't there, why he never asked, why he ran. The elevator doors closed. Carl's reflection stared back at him, a billionaire who'd won every battle except the one that mattered. Everything Carl had built was about to mean nothing. Because success without family is just an expensive way to be alone. What Carl didn't know, Paul was sitting in third period calculus when the principal pulled him out of class. His video had reached the school. Parents were calling. Media outlets were requesting interviews. And somewhere in the chaos of going viral, someone had sent the video directly to Angeline, Paul's mother, the woman who'd raised him alone, the woman who never spoke about his father, the woman whose face went white as snow when she saw the thumbnail. Because she recognized the man beside her son, the same green eyes, the same jawline, the same man she'd loved and lost 16 years ago. Carl Robinson, the father Paul had never met. The man who was, at this very moment, driving toward their house with no plan, no script, and no idea how to explain a lifetime of absence. And Paul had no idea his father was coming. But there was something neither of them knew, something that would make this reunion even more complicated than anyone imagined. Angeline Henson woke at 5:47 a.m., the way she had for 16 years, quietly, so Paul could sleep. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that doubled as a dining room. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbor's television through the walls and the radiator clanked every winter morning like clockwork. But it was theirs. She slipped out of bed, pulled on her old Georgetown nursing school sweatshirt, the one with the small bleach stain on the sleeve. She'd never been able to get out, and padded to the kitchen in socks, with a hole near the left toe that she kept meaning to throw away, but never did. The countertop was cluttered with the organized chaos of a working single mother. Paul's math homework stacked beside the toaster, a grocery list held to the fridge by a magnet shaped like a stethoscope, 3 coffee mugs in the dish rack because she kept forgetting to put them away. Angeline filled the kettle, set it on the stove with a familiar clink, and began pulling out ingredients for Paul's favorite breakfast blueberry pancakes from scratch. Her hands moved on autopilot, flour dusting the counter, sugar measured by feel rather than cup, baking powder, salt, that she always added with 3 precise shakes. She cracked 2 eggs into the bowl, the satisfying crack-splash-crack rhythm she could do with her eyes closed, whisked them with milk, and watched the batter come together the way it had 1,000 mornings before. This was her life. Simple, modest, enough. She'd built it piece by piece, nursing shifts at County General, where the fluorescent lights buzzed and the coffee tasted like cardboard, community college classes squeezed between double shifts, where she'd study anatomy while her patients slept, promotions earned through exhaustion and competence when other nurses quit, but she stayed. She'd raised Paul without child support, without help from her parents, who'd called her situation a consequence of poor choices, and stopped returning her calls, without anyone except her best friend Maya, who babysat when Angeline worked overnights and never asked for payment. And she'd done it with her head held high. Because Paul was worth every sacrifice, every missed concert because she had to work, every birthday cake from a box instead of a bakery. Every time she told him, maybe next year, when he asked about summer camp or soccer cleats that weren't secondhand, or the school trip to Washington, D.C. that cost $300 she didn't have. Paul never complained. He helped with groceries, carrying bags that were too heavy for him without being asked. He did his homework at the kitchen table without prompting, showing her his A's with quiet pride. He made her laugh with impressions of his teachers, and stayed up late talking with her about everything: movies, books, the universe, his dreams of becoming a filmmaker. Everything except his father. They had an unspoken agreement about that topic. Angeline poured batter onto the griddle, watched it bubble and sizzle, flipped each pancake with the precise timing of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, and tried not to think about the video. Maya had sent it at 6:14 a.m. with 3 words: "Angie, call me." Angeline had watched it in the bathroom with the door locked so Paul wouldn't hear, phone pressed close to her face, volume low. And when Paul's voice cracked, asking, "Why didn't my dad want me?" Angeline had to grip the sink to stay upright, porcelain cold under her palms, her own reflection staring back with eyes that suddenly looked 40 instead of 39. Because she knew the answer. And she'd spent 16 years protecting Paul from it. In that moment, every lie she'd ever told to protect him felt like it was crumbling. The pancakes were stacked on a plate, still warm, butter melting into golden pools, when her phone buzzed again. "Maya, have you seen the news?" Maya Paul's video hit 10 million views. There are reporters asking about him at the school. Angeline's stomach dropped that sickening lurch, like missing a step in the dark. She pulled up her browser with shaking fingers, typed Paul's name, and watched the search results explode across her screen. Articles, think pieces, reaction videos, news segments with concerned anchors using their serious voice. Her son's pain had become a national conversation, and buried in the coverage, she saw something that made her blood run cold, made her skin prickle with a kind of fear only a mother knows. A thumbnail comparison. Paul's face beside Carl Robinson's official corporate headshot. Viral teen resembles billionaire CEO. Could this be his secret son? Angeline's hands started shaking so badly, she almost dropped the phone. No. She'd kept Paul safe from that world for 16 years. From Carl's ruthless father who'd threatened legal action if she ever sought child support, who'd found her at the clinic with cold eyes and colder words. From the Robinson name that would have swallowed Paul whole, turned him into a pawn in corporate games. From a man who'd made it clear that ambition mattered more than love. But the internet didn't care about protection. It cared about clicks, about engagement, about turning private pain into public spectacle. And now Carl knew. Angeline could feel it in her bones. He'd seen the video. He'd done the math. And he was coming. She just didn't know when. The answer was, right now. At 10:23 a.m., while Paul was still in third period, and Angeline was folding laundry in the living room, matching socks with the TV playing quietly in the background. A black town car pulled up outside her building. Sleek. Expensive. So out of place in the Meadows district, it might as well have been a spaceship. Carl Robinson stepped out. He looked exactly the same. Older, sharper, expensive in ways that screamed, "I don't belong in this neighborhood." His suit probably cost more than her rent, more than 2 months' rent, if she was being honest. His watch caught the sunlight like a warning, all polished metal and precision engineering. But his face, God, his face, still had that same lost look he'd worn the night they met. When he'd been a broke engineering student, eating ramen for dinner, and convinced he'd never amount to anything, when she'd found him in the library at 2 a.m., head in his hands, breaking. Angeline watched from the window as he stood on the sidewalk, staring up at her building like it was a courtroom and he was about to face judgment. Her first instinct was to lock the door. Her second was to call the police. Her third, the one she hated herself for, was to check her reflection in the hallway mirror, to wish she'd worn something nicer than 15-year-old scrubs and a cardigan with a button missing. Now pay attention to what happens next. This is the moment everything changes. The knock came 30 seconds later. Soft, hesitant. 3 gentle taps that somehow sounded like an apology. Nothing like the confident billionaire the world saw in boardrooms and business magazines. Angeline wiped flour from her apron with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, smoothed her hair even though it didn't matter, steadied her breathing with 3 deep inhales the way her therapist had taught her years ago, and opened the door. The shock between them was a living thing. 16 years collapsed into a single moment, all the late-night conversations over cheap Chinese takeout, the laughter when his code finally worked at 4 a.m., the way he used to kiss her forehead when she was stressed about exams, the morning he walked away and never looked back. All of it rushing back like a dam breaking. Carl's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Angeline. Her name sounded like an apology he didn't know how to finish. Like prayer and regret mixed together. Carl. Hers sounded like armor. His eyes searched her face, cataloging the small lines at her temples that hadn't been there before. The gray strands she hadn't bothered to dye, because who had time or money for that? The nursing scrubs peeking out from under her cardigan, the exhaustion that lived in her shoulders. Then his gaze dropped to the apartment behind her. The modest furniture from IKEA and Goodwill. The framed photos on the wall in mismatched frames. Paul's school pictures. Paul at 8. Grinning with a missing front tooth and grass stains on his shirt. Paul at 12. Awkward and gangly in a soccer uniform, 3 sizes too big. Paul last month. 16 and heartbreakingly handsome, wearing the confident smile she'd taught him to fake, even when he didn't feel it. Every photo screamed the question Carl couldn't ask out loud. So he asked it anyway. Is he my son? Angeline grabbed his arm, his expensive suit jacket soft under her fingers, and pulled him onto the porch, closing the door behind them with more force than necessary. Keep your voice down. Angeline, he's at school. And he doesn't know you're coming. Carl's jaw clenched, muscle jumping. So it's true. It wasn't a question. Angeline crossed her arms, decades of buried anger rising to her throat like bile, hot and acidic, and impossible to swallow. What do you want me to say, Carl? That yes, Paul is yours? That I've spent 16 years raising him alone while you built your empire and never once wondered what happened to me? Never once thought to check if I was okay? If we were okay? Her voice was rising despite her best efforts. I tried to tell you. Her voice cracked like ice breaking. That day at the coffee shop, I was trying to tell you I was late, that I needed you to slow down for 5 minutes and listen, but you couldn't even do that. You were too busy, too stressed, too focused on your failing company to hear what I was saying. Carl's face went white, drained of color, like someone had pulled a plug. You were, he couldn't finish. Pregnant. Yes. 8 weeks. Angeline's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. And you were too busy, drowning in your startup to hear me. Too consumed with proving your father wrong to notice I was trying to tell you something life-changing. Why didn't you call? Carl's voice was desperate now, cracking at the edges. Send a letter? An email? Something? I tried. Angeline's composure shattered like glass. I called you 17 times that month. You never picked up. Every single call went to voicemail. I sent emails. They bounced back, account not found. I showed up at your office, and your assistant said you'd moved to the West Coast without leaving a forwarding address. Looked at me like I was some crazy ex-girlfriend. She stepped closer, eyes blazing with 16 years of rage. And then your father found me. Carl went completely still. What? He found me at the clinic, 4 months pregnant, sitting in the waiting room, terrified and alone. I don't know how he knew. Maybe he had you followed. Maybe he always knew about me and was just waiting. But he sat down next to me like we were old friends and told me exactly what would happen if I ever contacted you. Remember this detail, it's going to matter more than you think. Tears were building in Angeline's eyes now, hot and angry. He said, if I ever called you, if I ever asked for money, if I ever claimed Paul was yours, he'd destroy me. Professionally, legally, financially. Said he had lawyers who could prove I was unfit, that I'd trapped you deliberately, that I was after your money before you'd even made any. He'd take Paul the moment he was born, and make sure I never saw him again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And I believed him. Because I'd seen what powerful men do to women who get in their way. Because I had no money, no family support, no resources to fight back. So, I protected my son the only way I knew how. I disappeared. I built a life where your family couldn't touch us. Where Paul could grow up safe and loved, even if it meant he'd never know his father. Carl looked like he'd been struck, like every word was a physical blow. I didn't know. Angeline, I swear I didn't. Would it have mattered? Angeline's voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense. If I'd told you that day, if you'd known I was pregnant, would you have stayed? Or would you have resented me for ruining your big ambitions? For being the anchor that dragged you down? The question hung between them like a blade. Sharp, cutting, impossible to ignore. Carl opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said nothing. Because he didn't know the answer. And that not knowing was its own kind of confession. Let that sink in. They stood there in terrible silence. The morning sun was warm on their skin. Birds were singing somewhere down the street, sparrows or finches, Angeline couldn't tell. Somewhere down the block, kids were laughing, probably cutting class, living the kind of carefree life Paul never got to have. But on this porch, the past 16 years felt like an open wound. Still bleeding. Still raw. He made a video, Carl finally said, voice hoarse, about absent fathers. Angeline nodded, not trusting her voice. I know. It's gone viral. 17 million views. I know. He thinks I didn't want him. Angeline's voice softened despite herself, despite every wall she'd built. Because you didn't. I didn't know about him. That's different. Is it? She turned to face him fully now, meeting his eyes. You walked away, Carl. Not just from me. From everything. From the possibility. From the responsibility. You chose your company over you. I know. Carl's voice broke completely. Cracked down the middle. I know what I did. And I've regretted it every day since. Every single day for 16 years. Angeline wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. Some part of her that she hated still loved him, still remembered what they'd been before fear destroyed them. But 16 years of single motherhood had taught her that regret was cheap, easy, safe. Showing up was different. Actually being there, day after day. When things were hard and unglamorous and exhausting, that was what mattered. What do you want? She asked quietly. Carl looked at her with those green eyes Paul had inherited, the ones that used to make her melt. I want to meet him. I want to explain. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. I want a chance to be his father. Angeline's heart clenched painfully in her chest. Because she'd spent 16 years protecting Paul from this exact moment. And now, it was here. On her porch. In an expensive suit. Asking for what he'd never earned. He's not ready, she said. Neither am I, Carl admitted, and the honesty of it nearly broke her. But he deserves to know. He deserves the truth. Even if the truth is ugly. He deserves better than a father who shows up after a viral video makes it inconvenient not to. The words landed like a punch. Direct, brutal, true. Carl flinched, like she'd physically hit him. But before he could respond, they both heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, familiar, wrong. Paul shouldn't be home for hours. A familiar voice calling out. Mom? Whose car is that? Why are there? Angeline's blood turned to ice. Paul. Home early. Walking up the path with his backpack slung over one shoulder. And seeing his mother standing on the porch with a stranger who had his exact face. This was about to get so much worse. Paul stopped 3 steps from the top. His backpack slipped from his shoulder, hitting the concrete with a thud. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating with recognition and shock. Because he recognized the man standing beside his mother. Not from memory. From 17 million views. From a thumbnail. From the face the internet had paired with his own, like some cosmic joke. Carl Robinson. The billionaire CEO. The absent father. His father. Paul's hands started shaking, fingers curling into fists. His breath came short and fast. And for the second time in 24 hours, his entire world cracked wide open. What Paul didn't know, someone was watching, recording, about to make this private moment devastatingly public. You know, there are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Moments where the truth you've been running from finally catches up. And standing on that porch, all 3 of them were facing their after, whether they were ready or not. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever wondered about second chances, about family secrets finally surfacing, about whether people can really change, you're not alone. Thousands of women in our community watch these stories every week, because sometimes we need to know we're not the only ones carrying complicated histories. Because what happens next when Paul finally confronts the father who never knew he existed, it's going to test everything they thought they knew about forgiveness. And trust me, you'll want to be here for it. Paul's brain was doing that thing it did during panic attacks, processing too much information at once, while simultaneously going completely blank, like a computer trying to run too many programs and freezing. The man on their porch wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than their car, hell, more than everything they owned combined. His watch caught the morning light, all polished steel and expensive complications. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, the kind that required professional care. But it was his face that made Paul's chest tighten until he couldn't breathe. The same sharp jawline Paul saw every morning in the bathroom mirror, the one that looked too angular, too harsh. The same green eyes that stared back at him from every school photo, the ones kids said were intense. The same way his left eyebrow lifted slightly when he was stressed, a tic Paul had spent years trying to control. Paul had spent 16 years wondering what his father looked like. Turns out, he'd been looking at him his whole life. Just in reverse. Like seeing your own reflection distorted by time. Paul Angeline's voice was tight, careful, the way it got when she was trying not to break, when she was holding everything together through sheer force of will. Sweetheart, you're home early. Paul couldn't speak. His legs felt welded to the stairs, muscles locked. His throat was closing. Carl Robinson, because of course it was Carl Robinson, the billionaire from the thumbnail, the CEO his video had been paired with, by some cruel algorithmic joke designed to maximize engagement, took a half step forward. Paul, I know who you are. Paul's voice came out strangled, choked. The whole world knows who you are. The backpack slipped fully off his shoulder now, hitting the ground with a thud that felt too loud in the terrible silence. Textbooks spilling out onto the concrete, calculus, chemistry, English literature scattered like evidence of a normal life that had just ended. Paul's hands were shaking. His vision was blurring at the edges, dark spots creeping in. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a single thought looped on repeat like a broken record. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. This can't be. How long have you known? Paul's question was aimed at his mother, but his eyes never left Carl, boring into him like he could extract the truth through sheer force of will. Angeline stepped toward him, hand outstretched like she was approaching a wounded animal. Baby, let's go inside and… How long have you known? Paul's voice cracked, louder now, raw with betrayal that had been building his entire life and was finally, catastrophically, erupting. Since you were born, Angeline whispered, and it sounded like a confession at the altar. Since before you were born. The admission hit Paul like a freight train, full force. No warning. Devastating. So, my whole life. His laugh was bitter, broken. The sound of something precious shattering on stone. My whole life, you knew exactly who he was. Where he was. What he looked like. And you never… I was protecting you. From what? Paul shouted, voice echoing down the street, neighbors' curtains twitching, Mrs. Chen stopping mid-garden work to stare. From having a father? From knowing where I came from? From understanding why I spent 16 years feeling like half a person? He stopped. Because the pieces were clicking into place with devastating clarity, like a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his entire life, finally revealing its ugly picture. His video, the viral explosion, the thumbnail pairing him with Carl Robinson. The internet hadn't made a mistake. It had told the truth before anyone else could. It had exposed what everyone had been hiding. And that truth was about to get even more complicated. Paul's gaze snapped to Carl, who stood frozen like a man waiting for execution, like someone who knew the verdict was already guilty. You didn't know about me either, did you? Carl's silence was answer enough. The silence screamed louder than any words could. You found out from my video. Paul's voice was hollow now, emptied of everything except bitter understanding. 17 million people watched me cry about not having a father. And that's when you decided to show up. Not before. Not when it would have mattered. When it became a PR problem. Paul, it's not. Not what? Not that simple? Paul's anger was building. Years of unanswered questions, igniting all at once, like kindling catching fire. You left my mom before I was even born. You never called, never asked, never wondered if maybe, just maybe, you'd left something behind. Someone behind. Carl's face went pale, white as chalk. I didn't know she was pregnant. Because you didn't listen. Paul's shout, scattered birds from nearby trees, made an old man walking his dog turn and stare. She tried to tell you, and you were too busy building your empire to care. Too focused on yourself to notice anything else. Angeline's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling. Because Paul knew. He'd always known more than she'd realized. She'd thought she'd hidden it so well. How long have you been listening? Angeline's voice was barely audible, trembling like leaves before a storm. Paul's eyes were wet now, furious and devastated in equal measure, every emotion he'd ever buried, surfacing at once. Long enough. He turned back to Carl, hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white. All those nights, Mom worked double shifts, coming home so exhausted she could barely stand. All those times she was dead on her feet but still helped me with homework at midnight. All those birthdays where she made me feel like I had everything I needed even though I could see her crying in the bathroom after I went to bed, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't hear. Paul's voice was shaking violently now, every word a knife, finding its mark. She did that alone, because you left, because you chose everything else, your company, your ambitions, your precious empire. Carl looked like he'd been struck, like every word was a physical blow to the chest. I know. And I'm sorry? Paul cut him off, voice dripping with contempt that had been fermenting for 16 years. You're sorry? Great. That fixes 16 years. That makes up for every Father's Day, every bring your dad to school event, every time someone asked about my family and I had to lie, or change the subject, or pretend it didn't hurt. I'm not trying to fix anything, Carl said quietly, and at least that was honest. I know I can't, but I want. What? To be my dad now? Because it's convenient? Because the internet exposed you and now you have to do damage control for your precious company? Is this about me, or protecting your reputation? Because you're my son. Carl's voice cracked on the last word, breaking completely like a dam. Finally giving way. And I should have been there. Every day. Every moment. I should have. Paul laughed, a hollow, painful sound that made Angeline flinch like she'd been hit, like she'd heard the sound of her son's heart breaking. I made a video about absent fathers, about wondering why I wasn't enough, and the whole time, his breath hitched, tears streaming now, hot and angry on his cheeks. The whole time, my own father was out there living his best life, not even knowing I existed, not even caring enough to wonder, not even. He couldn't finish. The words got stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. That's not fair, Carl said. Your mother never told me. Don't. Angeline's voice was sharp as glass, cutting through the air like a blade. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. Don't you dare make me the villain in this story. Carl turned to her, stricken, realizing his mistake too late. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying that if you'd known, you would have stayed. Angeline's eyes blazed with 16 years of rage, finally unleashed, like a forest fire that had been smoldering underground. Really, Carl? 23-year-old you, terrified of failure, desperate to prove yourself to your father, convinced love was a distraction, that version of you would have chosen us? Would have walked away from your dreams for a screaming baby and a girlfriend you barely had time for? The question hung in the air like smoke. Choking. Unavoidable. Demanding an answer no one wanted to give. Carl opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said nothing. Because they all knew the answer. Even him. This is the moment Paul's worst fear was confirmed. Paul felt something inside him shatter. All those years of wondering, why didn't he want me? And the truth was somehow worse than any answer he'd imagined in all his lonely nights, all the times he'd invented heroic reasons for his father's absence. His father hadn't chosen to leave him specifically, hadn't made some calculated decision that Paul wasn't worth it. He'd just chosen everything else first. Paul was collateral damage, an afterthought, a consequence that never even registered on the radar. I don't need this, Paul said, voice hollow, emptied of everything, drained like a battery running on fumes. I don't need you showing up 16 years late, thinking you can just... I'm not thinking anything. Carl interrupted, desperate now, words tumbling out in a rush. I don't have a plan. I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that you exist, and I should have known sooner. And I can't fix the past, but maybe what? Paul's voice was deadly quiet now. More frightening than his shouting. The kind of quiet that comes before explosions. Maybe we can have a relationship now? Bond over the fact that you abandoned Mom and she had to build a life without you? Have awkward dinners where we pretend 16 years didn't happen? Paul, please, why wasn't I enough? The question tore out of Paul before he could stop it. Ripped from somewhere deep and wounded. From the place where he kept all the hurt he'd never let anyone see. The same question from his video. The question that had haunted him his entire life. Whispered in the dark when he couldn't sleep. Screamed silently during every Father's Day when other kids posted pictures with their dads. And now he was asking it to the man who'd made him feel that way. The man who could finally answer. The man who owed him at least that much. Carl's eyes filled with tears that spilled over, running down his face unchecked, and he made no move to wipe them away. You were always enough, he whispered, voice breaking. You were always enough. I was the one who wasn't. I was the one who failed, who was too broken, too scared, too selfish to be what you needed. The admission didn't heal anything, but it cracked something open, created the smallest space for truth to exist between them. And what happened next was being recorded. It was about to go viral. Again. Paul stared at his father, at this stranger, wearing his face, crying on their porch, stripped of all his billionaire armor, and felt the full weight of 16 years of absence, pressing down on him like gravity had suddenly tripled. I can't do this. Paul's voice broke, fracturing like ice under too much weight. I can't stand here and pretend this is okay, that you can just show up and... He couldn't finish. The tears were coming now, hot and furious and unstoppable. Years of buried pain, erupting like a volcano that had been dormant too long. Paul turned and ran. Not into the house, he couldn't face the walls that had held his whole life. The space that suddenly felt too small for all this truth. Too small for 16 years of lies finally exposed. He ran down the street, past Mrs. Chen, watering her garden with her phone suspiciously in hand, past the corner store where he and his mom bought groceries every Sunday, past everything familiar, until his lungs burned and his vision blurred, and he finally collapsed on a bench 3 blocks away. And he cried the way he'd cried in his video, except this time, his father knew. This time, there was no wondering, no speculating, no maybes. Just the terrible certainty that he'd been right all along. He hadn't been enough. Everything was about to get worse. Because that recording Mrs. Chen was making, it was already uploading. Back on the porch, Angeline rounded on Carl, with fury that had been building for 16 years. Contained by necessity, but finally unleashed like a dam breaking. You had no right to come here. No right to insert yourself into our lives without warning, without preparation, without thinking about what this would do to him. I had every right, Carl shot back, finding his spine somewhere in the wreckage. He's my son. He's my son. Angeline's voice was steel, wrapped in fire, molten and unyielding. I raised him. I fed him. I stayed up nights when he had nightmares about not having a father, when he'd wake up crying and asking why his dad didn't want to meet him. I taught him to read and tie his shoes, and believe in himself, despite growing up with a hole in his life where you should have been. Where were you? Building a company, Carl said quietly, and it sounded like the confession it was, like admitting to a crime. Trying to prove I was worth something. To who? Your father? Angeline's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to draw blood if words could cut. The man who threatened to take my baby if I ever contacted you? That's who you were trying to impress? That's who mattered more than your own child? Carl's face went white, drained completely, like someone had opened a valve. What? Your father found me, 4 months pregnant, sitting in a clinic waiting room, terrified and alone. Told me if I ever claimed Paul was yours, he'd destroy me. Take him away. Make sure I never saw my baby again. He wouldn't. He did. Angeline's voice cut like a blade through bone. And I believed him. Because men like him don't make empty threats. They have lawyers, and money, and power. And I had nothing. Nothing except the baby growing inside me, and a fierce, desperate need to protect him from your family's poison. Carl looked gutted, like she'd reached inside and pulled out everything vital, left him hollow. I didn't know, Angeline, I swear. It doesn't matter what you knew. She stepped closer, invading his space, forcing him to face her. What matters is Paul. And you just walked into his life with zero warning and confirmed his worst fear, that he wasn't important enough to find sooner. That he only matters now because the world is watching. That he's not a son, he's a PR problem. That's not true, isn't it? Angeline crossed her arms. You saw the video this morning. You're here by lunch. If he hadn't gone viral, would you have ever thought to look for me? To wonder what happened after you left? To ask yourself if there were consequences to walking away from a woman who was trying to tell you something important? The silence was damning, absolute, confirming every accusation. I want to make this right, Carl finally said, voice small, stripped of all his CEO confidence. You can't. I can try. Why? Guilt? Obligation? Because the world is watching, and you need to control the narrative before it destroys your company? Because he's my son. Carl's voice broke completely, everything spilling out like a wound finally opened. And I've already missed 16 years, his first steps, his first words, first day of school, every birthday, every milestone, every soccer game and school play and moment that mattered. I've missed everything, and I don't want to miss any. Continuation of complete script. More. Angeline studied him, really studied him for the first time since he'd arrived. This man who'd broken her heart into pieces she'd spent years carefully gluing back together. Who'd built an empire on the ambition that destroyed them. Who was standing on her porch looking more lost than the broke engineering student she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. And here's what she realized in that moment. Broken people can learn to heal, but only if they're willing to do the work. This isn't about what you want, she said quietly, voice suddenly soft but firm. It's about what Paul needs. Then tell me what he needs. Time. Space. A choice. Angeline's voice carried the weight of 16 years of making impossible decisions. I spent 16 years making decisions for him, because I had to. I protected him from your family, from your father's threats, from the possibility of rejection. I won't make this decision too. Carl's jaw clenched. What does that mean? It means if you want a relationship with Paul, you'll earn it, not buy it. Not force it. You'll show up, really show up, and let him decide if you're worth knowing. And if he says no? Angeline's smile was sad, carrying the ghost of what they'd once been. Then you'll live with that, the way I lived with raising him alone, the way he lived without a father. Sometimes the consequences of our choices don't come with second chances. She turned to go inside, hand on the doorknob. But Angeline, Carl's voice stopped her. Is a second chance even possible? She looked back at him, and for just a moment, he saw the girl who'd believed in him when no one else did. I don't know, Carl. That's up to Paul now. She went inside and closed the door, leaving Carl standing alone on the porch of a life he'd walked away from. A life that might never let him back in. But what none of them knew. 2 houses down, Mrs. Chen had stopped watering her garden. Her phone was out. The camera was rolling. And she'd captured everything: Paul's confrontation, Carl's confession, Angeline's fury. The whole messy, heartbreaking scene. Her finger hovered over the upload button, then pressed it. Within an hour, the video would have 500,000 views. By evening, 10 million. And Paul's private pain would become public property. Again, the video hit the internet at 2:47 p.m. By 3:15, it had 200,000 views. By 4, major news outlets were running with it. Billionaire CEO, confronted by secret son, watched the emotional encounter. TMZ, Carl Robinson's hidden child exposed. Viral star Paul Hinson confirms paternity. Forbes, Robinson Tech CEO faces father scandal. Stock prices drop 6%. Paul didn't know yet. He was still sitting on that bench 3 blocks from home, phone turned off, trying to remember how to breathe. Angeline didn't know yet. She was inside making tea with shaking hands, trying to process the fact that her carefully protected life had just imploded on her front porch. But Carl knew. His assistant called at 3:22 p.m. while he was still sitting in his car outside Angeline's building, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, everything he'd built feeling suddenly worthless. "Sir, we have a situation." Carl's voice was hollow. "What kind of situation?" "A neighbor recorded your conversation with Paul. It's everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. It's trending #1 worldwide." The words hit Carl like a physical blow. Like being struck by something he should have seen coming. How bad? 17 million views in under an hour. And climbing fast. Carl closed his eyes. His private devastation had become public entertainment. Again, the internet had taken his failure as a father and turned it into content, into clicks, into engagement metrics and ad revenue. By 5 p.m., Carl's phone was a war zone. Text from his publicist: "We need a statement. Now." Email from his head of PR: "Emergency meeting. Board is furious." Voicemail from his father, the first in 3 years: "Call me immediately. This is unacceptable." Carl listened to that one twice. His father's voice still had that edge. That tone that said, "You're embarrassing the family name." The same tone he'd used when Carl was 12 and cried at his grandmother's funeral. The same tone he'd used when Carl wanted to major in humanities instead of business. The same tone that had taught Carl emotions were weaknesses and family was a liability. Carl deleted the voicemail, then blocked the number. Some bridges were meant to burn. And some fathers didn't deserve second chances. The emergency board meeting happened at 6 p.m. via video call because Carl refused to leave the Meadows district. He wasn't running anymore. 12 faces appeared on his laptop screen, all varying degrees of panic and fury. Marcus Chen, the CFO, spoke first. "Carl, our stock dropping answers. We need damage control immediately." "What kind of damage control?" Carl's voice was flat, drained of everything except a strange calm. "A statement denying paternity until DNA results confirm." "No." The word landed like a gavel. Final, absolute. Jennifer Walsh, head of legal, leaned forward. "Carl, be reasonable. You haven't confirmed." "He's my son." Carl's voice was steady now, stronger than it had been all day. "I know he's my son, and I'm not going to lie about it." "This could cost us millions," Marcus argued, face reddening. "Investors hate personal scandals. The optics are terrible. The timing couldn't be worse with the merger." "I don't care about optics." Carl's jaw tightened. "I spent 16 years building this company while my son grew up thinking I didn't want him. I'm not spending another 16 protecting corporate image over the truth." Silence rippled through the video call. Jennifer tried again, voice careful. "Carl, I understand this is emotional, but from a legal standpoint, I'm no deflection. No lawyers spinning this into something it's not. I will not lie about my son." Marcus's face went red. "Then what exactly do you expect us to do? Watch the company burn?" "Your jobs," Carl said quietly. "Issue a statement confirming Paul is my son, that I recently learned of his existence, that I take full responsibility for my absence, and that I'm working to build a relationship with him." "That's PR suicide," Marcus muttered. "Maybe." Carl's eyes were hard, resolved. "But it's the truth, and I'm done running from those." He closed the laptop before anyone could argue. The board would either support him or stage a coup. Right now, he didn't care which. Because some things mattered more than stock prices. and his son was one of them. At Angeline's apartment, the chaos was different, but equally suffocating. Reporters had found her address by 4:30 p.m. By 5, there were 3 news vans parked outside, cameras pointed at her building like artillery. Angeline had closed all the curtains, locked the doors, and was currently fielding calls from Paul's school principal about media disruption and student safety concerns. "Miss Henson, we had reporters trying to access campus. Campus security had to intervene. We're recommending Paul stay home tomorrow while we implement new protocols." Angeline's head was pounding, temples throbbing. "Is Paul safe right now? He left early after the incident. We assumed he went home." "He's not here." Pause. Heavy silence that felt like judgment. "Miss Henson, do you know where your son is?" Angeline's chest tightened, fear crawling up her spine. "I'll find him." She hung up and immediately called Paul's phone. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. Maya appeared in the doorway she'd come over the moment she saw the video, loyal friend that she was. "Still nothing?" He turned his phone off. Angeline's voice cracked. "He's out there somewhere, and I don't know if he's okay, and there are reporters outside, and the whole world is watching my son fall apart. And breathe," Maya said firmly, taking Angeline's shoulders. "Paul is smart. He's probably just processing. Give him space. What if he does something stupid? What if he's hurt or—" "He won't. He's your kid. He knows how to handle hard things." But Angeline wasn't sure anymore. Because even strong kids break. And Paul had just had his entire world shattered on camera for millions to watch. The worst part? It was about to get so much worse. Paul finally turned his phone back on at 6:47 p.m. 93 missed calls, 216 text messages, 47 voicemails. He didn't open any of them. But he did scroll through social media, a mistake he'd regret immediately. The video was everywhere. Him confronting Carl, his voice breaking, the pain written across his face like "T's." At Sarah J. XO. "This is so heartbreaking." At Marcus Daly. "Billionaire deadbeat dad. Tale as old as time." At Jenna Reads. "Paul deserves better than a father who only showed up after going viral." At Truthseeker88. "Anyone else notice they have the exact same face? That kid is definitely his." At Mike Talks. "Imagine finding out your dad is a billionaire, and he never paid child support. I'd be furious." Paul's hands clenched around his phone. His private pain was now public property. His breakdown was content. His father's abandonment was a trending topic. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Paul was supposed to figure out how to feel. But there was somewhere he could go, somewhere safe. That evening, Paul went to his therapy appointment. Dr. Martinez had been seeing him monthly since freshman year, mostly for anxiety around college applications and social pressures. But today's session was different. "I saw the video," Dr. Martinez said gently, settling into her chair across from Paul. "Both of them. How are you holding up?" Paul laughed bitter and broken. "My life imploded on the internet. Twice. So, yeah. I'm fantastic. Talk to me about what you're feeling." "I don't know what I'm feeling." Paul's leg bounced anxiously, a tell he couldn't control. "Angry, betrayed, relieved, which is stupid, because what am I relieved about? Maybe that you finally have answers?" Paul went quiet. "Because that was exactly it. I used to make up stories about him," Paul admitted quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "My dad. I'd imagine he was a soldier who died in combat. Or a doctor saving lives overseas. Or, I don't know, someone heroic who couldn't be there for a good reason. Someone worth the absence." His voice cracked. "But the truth is worse. He was just scared and selfish. And he chose everything else first. His company. His ambitions. His father's approval. Everything except us. And how does that make you feel?" "Like I wasn't worth choosing." The words came out strangled, forced through a throat tight with unshed tears. "And I know that's not logical. I know it says more about him than me. But it doesn't change the fact that I spent 16 years wondering why I wasn't enough." Dr. Martinez nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's a survival mechanism, Paul. You built resentment to protect yourself from heartbreak. It's easier to be angry at someone who abandoned you than to grieve the relationship you never had. Paul wiped his eyes roughly. So what do I do now? What do you want to do? I want him to disappear. I want to rewind to yesterday when I didn't know. Paul's breath hitched. I want to believe he actually cares. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I should. You don't have to decide today. Everyone's waiting for me to decide. The internet wants a reunion. My mom wants me protected. And Paul's jaw clenched. He's probably going to disappear again the moment the media moves on to the next scandal. Do you really believe that? Paul didn't answer. Because he didn't know what he believed anymore. Everything felt uncertain, unstable. Like standing on ground that might give way any second. At 8:15 p.m., Carl was sitting in his car outside Paul's school. The building was empty, dark, locked. But Carl knew Paul had therapy on Tuesday evenings. Angeline had mentioned it once, years ago. Back when they used to talk about everything, when life was simple and love felt possible. So he waited. At 8:47 p.m., Paul emerged from the side entrance. He froze when he saw the black town car, body going rigid. Carl got out slowly, hands visible, non-threatening, trying to look as harmless as a man could look when he'd just destroyed someone's life. I'm not here to ambush you. I wanted to apologize. Again. Paul's face was unreadable, carefully blank. For what? Leaving? Showing up? Ruining my life twice in one day? For all of it. Carl's voice was raw. For not being there. For not knowing. For making your pain public. For confirming every fear you ever had about not being wanted. For complités. Stop. Paul held up a hand. I don't want your apologies. Apologies are cheap. They cost you nothing. Then what do you want? Paul's eyes blazed with something fierce and wounded. I want you to prove it. Prove what? That you care. That this isn't just damage control or guilt, or, his voice broke, that I actually matter to you. That I'm not just a PR problem you need to solve. Carl took a step forward, desperate. You do matter. Paul, you. Then show up, Paul shouted, the words exploding out of him like they'd been building pressure for 16 years. Not just today. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when the world is watching. Show up. Be there. Prove that I'm worth more than your company and your reputation and whatever the hell else you've spent 16 years chasing. The words echoed in the empty parking lot. Carl stood there, gutted, undone, stripped of every defense he'd ever built. I will, he whispered, every day. I'll show up every single day until you believe me. Paul stared at him, searching for a lie, a crack, any sign this was temporary or performative. But all he saw was his own face. Older, wealthier, broken in different ways. But still his. We'll see, Paul said finally. Then he turned and walked away. Carl watched him go, hands shaking, heart pounding, and made a promise to himself right there in that parking lot. He would show up every single day, no matter what it cost, because Paul was worth everything. And Carl had 16 years to make up for. This is where the story really begins, isn't it? Not with the confrontation, not with the viral video, but with a man making a promise to show up, and a boy deciding whether to believe him. I've talked to so many women over the years who've carried stories like this, men who left, fathers who disappeared, promises that were broken. And the hardest question is always, can people really change? Is redemption actually possible? If you're wondering the same thing, you're going to want to see what happens next. Because Paul's about to test Carl in ways neither of them expected. And what unfolds, it's going to challenge everything you thought you knew about forgiveness and family. Hidden chance, because your perspective matters here. This community is built on women supporting each other through complicated stories. Let's see if Carl can actually keep his promise. Paul made it through exactly 2.5 periods before everything fell apart. First period, whispers, students staring. Phones quickly pocketed when teachers walked by. Second period, a girl he barely knew, Jessica something from his English class, asked if his mom was getting child support now, and if that meant he'd finally be able to afford decent clothes. He ignored her, kept his head down, focused on his notes. Third period, chemistry, was where it all went to hell. Trevor Morrison sat 2 seats behind Paul. captain of the lacrosse team, trust fund kid, the type who wore boat shoes without socks and thought everyone else's struggles were entertainment for his amusement. Paul was trying to focus on Mr. Riley's lecture about molecular bonds when Trevor's voice cut through the classroom loud enough for everyone to hear, quiet enough to sound like he didn't mean for Paul to catch it. My dad said Paul's mom probably trapped Robinson on purpose. Baby trapped a rich guy. Classic move. Paul's pen stopped moving. I mean, she was a nursing student. He was about to be a billionaire. Do the math. A few kids snickered. Paul's jaw clenched, muscle jumping. Bet she's celebrating now. 16 years of child support back pay? That's a nice payday for opening her. Paul was out of his seat before he realized he'd moved. The punch landed square on Trevor's jaw. Trevor went down hard, chair clattering, students screaming. And Paul, quiet, thoughtful, never been in a fight. Paul was on top of him, throwing another punch before Mr. Riley could pull them apart. Don't you ever talk about my mother like that. Paul's voice was raw, furious, unrecognizable even to himself. Trevor's nose was bleeding. Paul's knuckles were split. Mr. Riley was yelling. And the whole thing was, of course, already being recorded on 3 different phones. The principal's office smelled like coffee and disappointment and consequences. Paul sat in the chair across from Principal Hayes, right hand wrapped in ice, left hand shaking with leftover adrenaline that made him feel electric and exhausted at once. I'm calling your mother, Hayes said, reaching for the phone. She's at work. Paul's voice was flat. Emptied. She can't leave. She's covering someone's shift. Hayes paused. Then I'll call your, she caught herself, the awkwardness of the moment hanging heavy. Is there another guardian we can contact? Paul's chest tightened. Because there was, wasn't there? A father who'd promised to show up every day. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. Call Carl Robinson. Hayes's eyebrows shot up. Yeah, that one. She made the call. Paul heard fragments through the receiver. Altercation. Another student injured, needs to be picked up immediately. And then Carl's voice, muffled, but clear. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He made it in 12. Paul saw the black town car pull up through the office window. Carl walked in wearing a different suit than yesterday, navy, this time instead of charcoal, but the same expression, lost, worried. Like he'd been waiting for this call his whole life, and dreading it in equal measure. His eyes found Paul immediately. Scanned him for injuries with the intensity of someone cataloging damage. Landed on the ice pack and split knuckles. Something passed across his face, concern mixed with something Paul couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe? Or recognition. Like seeing himself reflected back. What happened? Carl asked Principal Hayes, but his eyes never left Paul. Hazing. Paul's suspension, 3 days, pending review. The other boy? Carl's voice was tight, controlled, but barely. Suspended as well. His parents are filing a complaint. But given the provocation, Hayes glanced at Paul. We're considering it mutual combat. Carl nodded once, sharply. Thank you. We'll go now. He placed a hand on Paul's shoulder, tentative, testing, like touching something fragile. Paul didn't pull away. But he didn't lean in either. Progress, measured in millimeters. The car ride was silent for the first 7 minutes. Carl behind the wheel, Paul in the passenger seat, staring out the window, watching the Meadows district blur past. The driver, James, according to his nameplate, had been dismissed. Carl wanted to drive himself. Probably thought it would help. It didn't. The silence was suffocating, heavy, with everything unsaid. Paul could feel questions building in the air between them like storm clouds gathering. Finally, Carl spoke. Do your knuckles hurt? Yeah. We'll get them looked at. I'm fine. More silence. Thicker now. Then, what did he say? Paul's jaw clenched. Doesn't matter. It does to me. Why? You gonna sue him? Throw money at the problem until it goes away? Carl flinched like he'd been hit. No. I just want to understand. Paul laughed bitter and sharp. He said my mom trapped you. That she got pregnant on purpose to get your money. That she's been waiting 16 years for a payday. That she's probably celebrating now that her plan worked. Carl's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, until Paul could see the tendons standing out. And you hit him. Wouldn't you? Yeah. Carl's voice was rough, gravelly. I would have done worse. The admission hung in the air between them. Unexpected, honest. Paul turned to look at him. You would? Your mother is. Carl's voice caught. She's the strongest person I've ever known. She raised you alone. Worked herself to exhaustion. Never asked for help because my father threatened her. Never took the easy way out. And she did it with grace and love. And he stopped. Swallowed hard. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects you. And yeah, I would have hit him too. Probably harder than you did. Paul stared at his father. This stranger, who kept saying things that sounded true, that felt true. But 16 years of absence made trust impossible. Made belief feel dangerous. Halfway home, Paul broke. Pull over. What? Pull over, now. Carl pulled into a gas station parking lot. Engine still running. Hazard lights blinking. Paul's breathing was ragged. His hands were shaking. And suddenly, all the questions he'd been holding back came pouring out like water through a broken dam. Why didn't you want me? Carl's face went pale. Paul. No, you don't get to avoid this. Answer me. Why didn't you want me? Why did you leave her alone? Why wasn't I worth the truth? The questions came faster now. Each one a wound being reopened with surgical precision. Was it because you were scared? Because you were selfish? Because I was an inconvenience to your plans? Because you looked at her and thought, I don't want a kid with this woman? Paul, stop. Why wasn't I enough? Paul's voice cracked completely, shattered like glass. What was so wrong with me that you couldn't even… Nothing. Carl's shout filled the car, sudden and fierce. There was nothing wrong with you. There was everything wrong with me. Silence crashed down. Paul's chest was heaving. Carl turned in his seat, facing Paul fully now, eyes red and desperate, and more honest than Paul had ever seen another human be. I was 23 years old, and terrified of failing. My father told me every day that I was soft, weak, that I'd never amount to anything, that love made you vulnerable, and vulnerability was death in business, that caring about people would destroy me. His voice shook. So when things with your mother got serious, when I felt myself falling, I ran. I convinced myself I was protecting her, that she deserved someone stable, secure, better than a broke engineer with a failing company and daddy issues. Carl's hands were shaking now too, trembling like leaves. I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known, would it have changed anything? Paul's voice was hollow, emptied of hope. Carl went quiet. Then, I don't know. And that's the worst part. 23-year-old me was so broken, so convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. I genuinely don't know if I would have stayed. The confession gutted them both. Left them bleeding in a gas station parking lot with the engine running, and their futures uncertain. But I know this, Carl continued, voice fierce now, desperate and certain. You were worth everything, worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth choosing over every dollar I've ever made, every deal I've ever signed, every success I've ever celebrated alone. I was just too damaged to see it, too scared to believe I could be both successful and loved. Tears were streaming down Paul's face now, hot and unstoppable. I failed you both, Carl whispered. I failed at the only thing that actually mattered. And I can't fix that. I can't go back and be the father you deserved. But I'm here now, and I'm not running anymore. Paul wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to. But belief required trust. And trust required proof. And proof required time. I don't know if I can forgive you, Paul said quietly. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Carl's voice was raw. I'm just asking for a chance to show up. Every day. Until you decide whether I'm worth knowing. Whether I can earn a place in your life. Paul didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. And somehow, that felt like progress. Like the first tiny crack in a wall that had taken 16 years to build. When they pulled up to Angeline's apartment 30 minutes later, she was waiting on the porch. Her face was a storm of worry and relief and fury all swirling together. She pulled Paul into a crushing hug the moment he stepped out of the car, hands checking him for injuries like she used to when he was little. Are you okay? The school called. They said you were in a fight. Let me see your hand. I'm fine, Mom. You're not fine. You punched someone. You never… She pulled back, searching his face like a map. What happened? Paul glanced at Carl, who was standing beside the car, uncertain, waiting for permission to exist in this moment. Trevor said something about you. I handled it. Angeline's eyes narrowed dangerously. What did he say? Doesn't matter. It's handled. But Angeline knew her son. She'd spent 16 years learning to read every micro-expression. She turned to Carl. What did he say? Carl's jaw tightened. That she trapped you. That you got pregnant on purpose for money. Angeline's face went white. Then red. Then something beyond color, pure fury distilled into human form. That little, "Mom, I said it's handled." But the damage was done. Angeline sank onto the porch steps, head in her hands, shoulders shaking. This is exactly what I was afraid of. People judging, making assumptions, turning our lives into gossip and speculation. Mom, Paul sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. I don't care what they think. You should. This will follow you. To college. To job interviews. Every time someone Googles your name. Let it. Paul's voice was firm, stronger than she'd heard in days. I'm not ashamed of you. I'm not ashamed of us. And anyone who wants to make this ugly, that's on them, not us. Angeline looked at her son, 16 years old, and somehow ancient. When had he become this strong? When had he learned to carry weight she'd tried so hard to shield him from? Carl cleared his throat. Can I talk to you? Alone? Angeline stiffened. If this is about, it's not about Paul, not directly, it's about something else. She studied him warily, then nodded. Paul, go inside. I'll be right there. Paul hesitated, then went. Once the door closed, Angeline turned to Carl. What? Carl took a breath, gathering courage. After everything today, Paul getting suspended, the fight, the questions he asked me in the car, I realized something. He's carrying all this pain because he doesn't understand the whole story. He understands enough. Does he? Carl's eyes were intent. Does he know I tried to reach out? That I wrote letters? Angeline froze, her whole body going rigid. How do you? I wrote 17 letters in the first year after we broke up. Apologies, explanations, regrets, things I couldn't say to your face because I was a coward. I never sent them because I convinced myself it was better to leave you alone. But I wrote them. Angeline's face went pale, blood draining away. I have them too, she whispered. What? Your letters. You left them in your old apartment. Your roommate gave them to me when I came looking for you. Said you'd moved and abandoned everything, including a box of mail. Carl's breath caught, chest tightening. You've had them? All these years? I couldn't throw them away. They were proof that part of you cared, even if you never sent them, even if you never followed through, even if they were just words on paper that never translated to action. Her voice broke. I kept them in a box, hidden in my closet. I was going to give them to Paul when he turned 18. So he'd know, she swallowed hard. So he'd know you weren't completely absent, just absent enough to matter, just gone enough to leave a hole. Carl felt like the ground had shifted beneath him, like reality had tilted on its axis. May I read them? His voice was barely audible. Please. I need to remember who I was, what I felt, what I was too scared to say. Angeline looked at him for a long moment, weighing, measuring, deciding, then nodded. Wait here. She disappeared inside. And Carl stood on that porch, heart hammering, knowing that whatever was in those letters would either damn him completely or offer the smallest sliver of redemption. Either way, the truth was coming, and he couldn't run from it anymore. You know what strikes me most about this moment? It's not the drama, not the confrontation. It's the letters. The words Carl wrote, but never sent. The proof that somewhere beneath all that fear and ambition, he actually cared. How many of us have unsaid words locked away? Letters we never sent, apologies we never gave, truths we were too scared to speak? If this story is making you think about your own unsent letters, your own complicated relationships with absent fathers or broken families, I want you to know you're not alone. This community is full of women who've lived through versions of this story. Women who've forgiven, women who've walked away, women, because what happens next changes everything. Those letters Carl wrote, they're about to reopen every wound he thought was buried. And what Paul discovers in them, it's going to force him to see his father as to hear it. Sometimes the stories that hurt the most are the ones that heal us. Let's see what those letters say. Angeline returned with a shoebox. Plain, worn at the corners, the kind you'd find at any department store for $20. But when she handed it to Carl, It felt like holding 16 years of unspoken history. Like holding evidence of a life he'd walked away from. Like holding proof of his own cowardice. "I haven't opened this in years," she said quietly. "I almost threw it away 100 times. But I couldn't. They were all I had of you, that wasn't anger or regret." Carl's hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, 17 letters. Still in their original envelopes. Some yellowed with age. Some with coffee stains in the corners. One with what looked like a teardrop mark that had dried years ago, the paper slightly warped. All addressed to Angeline. All stamped. None mailed. Carl pulled out the first one, dated 3 weeks after their breakup. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble in his hands. His own handwriting stared back at him, younger, messier, desperate. He began to read. Letter 1, September 14th. Angeline, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I have the right to send it. But I can't stop thinking about how I left things. How I left you. The company is drowning. My father called yesterday and said if I don't turn this around in 6 months, he's pulling all funding. Everything I've worked for will disappear. Everything I sacrificed us for will mean nothing. But so did you. You disappeared too. And I don't know which loss feels worse. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry. Carl. Carl's throat tightened. He remembered writing this, 2 a.m., in his cramped studio apartment, half drunk on cheap whiskey, crying in a way he hadn't let himself cry since childhood, since the day his mother left and his father told him, "Robinson men don't cry." He'd sealed the envelope with shaking hands, walked to the mailbox in his pajamas, and at the last second, couldn't do it. Because sending it felt like admitting he'd made a mistake. And admitting mistakes meant weakness. So he went home and buried himself in code instead, in work, in the safe numbness of ones and zeros. Letter 4, November 2nd. Angeline, I saw a woman today who looked like you. Same hair, same walk, same way of carrying herself, like the world was both wonderful and heartbreaking at once. My heart stopped for a full 5 seconds before I realized it wasn't you. I don't know why I'm writing these. You'll never see them. But somehow putting this on paper makes me feel less alone, less like I'm drowning. The company got its first major investor. My father actually said he was proud. First time in my life. I should be celebrating. But all I can think about is how you used to say I was enough. Even when I had nothing. Even when I was failing. Even when the world told me I'd never make it. I miss that. I miss you believing in me. I miss you. See. Angeline's breath hitched beside him. She'd never seen these words, never knew he'd written them. All those years, she'd believed he'd simply moved on, that she'd been easy to forget. Just another failed relationship in his rearview mirror. But these letters told a different story. A story of a man running from the only thing that made him human. Letter 7, January 19th. Angeline, I tried calling today, your number's disconnected. I went by your apartment. Someone else lives there now. A family with 2 kids. I stood outside, like a creep, watching them unpack. I asked your roommate where you went. She said you moved, and didn't leave a forwarding address. Then she called me several names I probably deserved. I don't blame you. If someone hurt me the way I hurt you, I'd disappear too. I'd erase every trace. I'd build a new life where that person couldn't find me. My father says I'm finally thinking like a businessman. That cutting emotional ties makes me stronger. That this is proof I'm ready to lead. But I don't feel stronger. I feel hollow. Like I traded my humanity for success and got a terrible deal. The company's growing. We just signed our 5th client. Everyone says we're going to make it. That we'll be millionaires within 2 years. But every success feels empty. I hope you're okay. I hope you're happy. I hope you found someone who deserves you. Someone who isn't broken. Someone who knows how to stay. Carl. Carl's hands were shaking now, the paper rustling. He remembered this one too. The night he'd written it, he'd almost driven to her parents' house. Almost showed up and begged for another chance. For forgiveness. For just 5 minutes to explain. But his father had called with news of a major investor meeting. And Carl had chosen the meeting. Always the meeting. Always the company. Always everything except the one person who mattered. Letter 12, August 3rd. Angeline, it's been a year. The company's worth $8 million now. We're hiring. Expanding. opening a West Coast office. My father finally admits I was right about the business model. I should feel vindicated. Instead, I feel like I sold my soul for success. Like I'm rich and empty and alone. You were right about me. I was too scared to choose love over ambition. Too broken to believe I could have both. Too damaged by my father's lessons to trust that vulnerability wasn't weakness. And now I have one, and I've lost the other. And I don't know how to live with that. I'm sorry. I'll keep saying it even though you'll never hear it. Even though sorry doesn't change anything. Even though I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm sorry, Carl. Angeline wiped her eyes, tears streaming freely now. Keep reading, she whispered. The later letters got shorter, more desperate. Like a man drowning and trying to fit his entire life into fewer and fewer words. Some were just a few lines. I dream about you. Every night. The same dream where I didn't walk away. I wonder if you think about me. Probably not. Probably better that way. I hope you're okay. I hope you're building the life you deserve. I'm not okay, but you probably guessed that. The last letter was dated 2 years after their breakup. Letter 17, March 30th. Angeline, this is the last one, I promise. I can't keep writing to a ghost. I can't keep having one-sided conversations with someone who's moved on, who's probably forgotten me, who's living a life I'm not part of. The company's going public. I'm going to be a millionaire on paper. Multi-millionaire, actually. My father says I've finally made something of myself. That I'm finally a Robinson worth the name. But I look in the mirror and I don't recognize who's looking back. I became everything he wanted me to be. And lost everything that made me human. I hope you found happiness. I hope you found love. I hope you never think about me. Because thinking about you is killing me slowly. One successful day at a time. Goodbye, Angeline. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be what you needed. I'm sorry I chose fear over love. I'm sorry I was my father's son instead of my own man. Carl. Carl set the letter down with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His face was wet. He didn't remember starting to cry, but now he couldn't stop. Angeline was crying 2 silent tears that she didn't bother wiping away. You wrote all these, she whispered, and never sent any of them. 17 chances to reach out. 17 moments where you chose silence. I was a coward. You were terrified. That's not an excuse. No. Angeline's voice was firm, but not unkind. It's not, but it's the truth. And sometimes truth is all we have to work with. They sat in silence for a long moment. The letters spread between them like evidence at a trial. Proof of regret. Proof of feeling. Proof that love doesn't just disappear, even when we run from it. Finally, Carl spoke. Why did you keep them? Because they proved you cared, even if you never showed it, even if you never followed through, even if care without action is ultimately meaningless. Angeline picked up one of the letters, reading it again with eyes that had seen 16 years pass. Paul needed to know his father wasn't a monster, just a broken man who made terrible choices. Is there a difference? Yes. She looked at him, really looked at him. Monsters don't feel regret. They don't write 17 letters. They don't drown in their mistakes. You drowned, Carl. You just drowned quietly. Where no one could see. Carl's laugh was bitter. Regret's easy when you're writing letters you never send. Actually showing up is harder. Actually facing consequences is harder. Then show up now. I'm trying. I know. Angeline's voice softened, some of the armor falling away. But trying isn't enough for Paul. He needs consistency. Proof. Time. He needs to know you won't disappear the moment it gets hard or inconvenient. How much time? However long it takes. Could be months. Could be years. Could be never. Carl nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. Then, why did you really leave? Not just because I pushed you away. You could have fought harder, forced me to listen, showed up at my office every day until I paid attention. Why did you disappear completely? Angeline was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to give. Because I was pregnant and terrified and alone, she finally said. And your father found me at the clinic and threatened to take my baby if I ever contacted you. Told me I was ruining your life, that you were finally becoming the son he needed. That if I truly loved you, I'd let you succeed without the burden of a child you didn't want. She took a shaky breath. He said I was selfish for even considering telling you. That a real woman would walk away and let you build your empire. And when I said I needed help, that I couldn't do this alone, he offered me money, $50,000 to disappear, to get an abortion and never contact you again. Carl's face went white, completely bloodless. He said that, word for word. Angeline's voice hardened. And when I refused the money and said I was keeping the baby, that's when he threatened me. Said he had lawyers who could prove I was unfit, that he'd take Paul and I'd never see him again, that fighting him would destroy me. You should have told me. How? Angeline's voice broke. You'd already made your choice, Carl. The company. Your father. Success. Where did I fit in that equation? Where did a baby fit? You couldn't even spare 5 minutes to hear me out. How was I supposed to believe you'd choose us over everything you'd worked for? You should have fit everywhere. You and Paul both. But we didn't. The words hung heavy, undeniable. And I wasn't going to raise Paul in the shadow of a father who resented his existence, who saw him as the mistake that ruined a brilliant career. So I left. I built a life. And I did my best to make sure Paul never felt like a mistake. Carl looked gutted, hollowed out. I wouldn't have resented him. Wouldn't you? Angeline's eyes were piercing, seeing through every defense. 23-year-old you, terrified of failure, desperate to prove yourself, convinced that caring about people was weakness. You really think you would have welcomed an unplanned pregnancy? That you would have been a good father? The silence was answer enough. Long, heavy, damning. That's why I left, Angeline whispered. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved Paul more. More than I loved you. More than I loved the idea of us. More than I loved myself. And he deserved better than parents who weren't ready for him. Upstairs, Paul pressed his ear against his bedroom window, the one that overlooked the porch. He'd been listening for the past 20 minutes. Heard every word. Every confession. Every painful truth that had been buried for 16 years. And for the first time, he saw his father not as the absent billionaire, but as a terrified kid who'd made terrible choices and spent years drowning in regret. Paul watched Carl cry on the porch. Real tears, ugly crying. The kind that shook your whole body and came from somewhere deep and wounded. His father, this powerful CEO the world feared, was breaking apart in front of his mother. And something in Paul's chest cracked open. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But understanding. The beginning of it, anyway. 20 minutes later, Carl stood to leave. Continuation and completion of script. 20 minutes later, Carl stood to leave. Thank you, he said to Angeline. For keeping the letters. For raising Paul. For being stronger than I ever was. Don't. Angeline held up a hand. Don't thank me for doing what you should have done. Don't make me noble for surviving your absence. Carl nodded. Deserved that. He was halfway to his car when the door opened. Paul stood in the doorway. Still in his school clothes, the ones with grass stains from gym class. Eyes red like he'd been crying too. Hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Paul? Carl's voice caught. Paul walked down the steps slowly. Stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to speak, far enough to run if needed. I heard you, Paul said quietly. Talking with Mom. About the letters. About your father. About everything. Carl's face went pale. Paul, I don't know if I forgive you. Paul's voice was steady, but soft, carrying the weight of 16 years. I don't know if I can. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Carl nodded, throat tight, expecting rejection. But I want to understand. Paul's eyes met his father's. And something passed between them. Recognition. Connection. The beginning of something fragile. I want to know who you were. Who you are. Why you made the choices you made. Not because it excuses anything, but because you're my father. And I need to know where I came from. Hope flickered in Carl's chest, fragile and terrifying and more precious than any deal he'd ever closed. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Everything. No more secrets, no more running. Not today. Paul glanced back at the house, at his mother watching from the window. But maybe, soon. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was a door left open. A crack of light in 16 years of darkness. And that was more than Carl deserved. Thank you, Carl whispered. Paul nodded once, then went back inside. And Carl stood in the driveway, watching the door close, feeling something he hadn't felt in 16 years. Hope. Real, terrifying, fragile hope. The kind that could either heal everything or break him completely. Carl showed up the next morning at 7:42 a.m. Angeline opened the door in her scrubs, coffee mug in hand, clearly not expecting him. "What are you doing here?" "I promised Paul I'd show up." Carl held up a bag from the bakery 3 blocks over. "I brought breakfast, if that's okay." Angeline studied him for a long moment, weighing, measuring, looking for cracks in his resolve. Then stepped aside. "Paul's getting ready for school. Suspension starts tomorrow." Carl nodded and walked in, setting the bag on the kitchen counter with the careful movements of someone entering sacred space. Someone who knew they were being tested. Paul emerged from his bedroom 10 minutes later, stopped dead when he saw Carl sitting at their small kitchen table. "You're here." "I said I would be." Paul's expression was unreadable. "It's 7:50 in the morning." "I know, I brought blueberry muffins. Your mom said they're your favorite." Paul glanced at his mother, who shrugged. "They are." Paul grabbed a muffin, pulled out a chair not next to Carl, but not across the room either, and sat. They ate in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile. More cautious. Like two strangers learning to exist in the same space without combusting. Learning that maybe, possibly, they could breathe the same air. Carl showed up the next day too. And the next. And the day after that. He didn't force conversation. Didn't push for emotional breakthroughs or dramatic moments. Just appeared consistent, quiet, present. On day 4, Paul came downstairs, and Carl was already there, helping Angeline with dishes. "You don't have to do that," Angeline said. "I know. You're a billionaire. You probably have people who—" "I'm not a billionaire here." Carl's voice was soft but certain. "I'm just a man trying to earn his way back into his family's life. And family does dishes." Angeline went quiet. But she didn't tell him to leave. And that felt like progress. By the end of the first week, Paul's suspension was over. He returned to school to whispers and stares, but Trevor Morrison had transferred to a private academy, and the administration had quietly implemented a no-tolerance for bullying policy that everyone knew was code for, "Don't talk about Paul Henson's family." That Friday afternoon, Paul sent Carl a text. The first one he'd ever sent to his father. "Soccer practice, 4 p.m. Field behind the school, if you want." Carl's hands trembled as he typed back. "Carl, I'll be there." Carl arrived at 3:47 p.m. The bleachers were mostly empty, a few parents, some younger siblings playing on the sidelines, the smell of cut grass and teenage sweat. Paul was on the field, warming up with his team. Number 17. Forward position. He saw Carl, nodded once, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him beyond that single nod. But he'd invited him, and he'd noticed him arrive. Carl climbed to the 3rd row and sat. Not too close to the other parents, not trying to claim space he hadn't earned, not trying to be the dad he hadn't been for 16 years. Just watching. For 90 minutes, Carl watched his son play. Watched him sprint down the field, aggressive and focused. All the anger and confusion scored twice, missing by inches both times. Watched him laugh with teammates during water breaks. This whole life Carl had missed unfolding before him. Watched him live a life Carl had no part in building but desperately wanted to join. When practice ended, Paul jogged over, sweaty and flushed, and breathing hard. "You stayed the whole time. You asked me to come." Paul grabbed his water bottle, drank deeply. "Most parents leave after 20 minutes, get bored." "I'm not most parents." "No," Paul said quietly, and there was something in his voice, not quite forgiveness, but maybe acceptance. "You're not." It wasn't warm. But it wasn't cold either. Progress came in inches, not miles. And Carl would take every inch offered. He'd crawl, if he had to. The following week, Paul had a school video project due. A documentary about someone who changed your perspective. He'd been stuck for days, unable to settle on a subject that felt authentic, that felt true. Tuesday night, Carl showed up for dinner. Angeline had started inviting him. Tentatively. Carefully. Testing whether he'd actually show up consistently. And Paul mentioned the assignment. "I don't know who to interview. Everyone feels too obvious or too fake." Like I'm just checking boxes. Carl set down his fork. What about your mom? Paul blinked. What? Interview your mother. About raising you alone. About the choices she made. About what changed her perspective on strength and motherhood and survival. Angeline's face flushed. Carl. No, that's actually Paul's eyes lit up in a way Carl had never seen before. That's perfect. 2 hours later, Paul had his camera set up in the living room. Angeline sat nervously in front of it, smoothing her hair, fidgeting with her cardigan. And Carl, without being asked, operated the lighting and audio equipment. He'd Googled basic videography during his lunch break, watched 7 YouTube tutorials, bought professional lights from B&H Photo, and had them delivered same day, just in case Paul needed help, just in case he could be useful. Paul noticed, maybe his father was trying, like maybe trying mattered. The interview was raw and beautiful. Angeline talked about the fear of raising a child alone, the exhaustion that lived in her bones, the moments she almost broke, and the moments she found strength she didn't know she had. But also the joy, the pride, the fierce love that made every sacrifice worth it, that turned hardship into purpose. By the end, all 3 of them were crying. Paul turned off the camera and hugged his mother, holding on like she might disappear. Carl stood in the corner, trying to stay invisible, trying not to intrude on their moment. But Angeline caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And that mattered. That mattered more than Carl could express. Saturday morning, Carl texted Paul. Carl, want to learn to drive. Paul, I'm 16, I already know how to drive. Carl, want to learn to drive well? 30 minutes later, they were in Carl's car in an empty parking lot. Paul behind the wheel, Carl in the passenger seat. Both nervous for different reasons. Okay, so adjust your mirrors first. I know how to adjust mirrors. Just checking. Paul shot him a look. You're nervous. Terrified. You're driving a $90,000 car. Then why'd you offer? Because, Carl's voice softened, because my father never taught me, never had time, never thought it was important, and I always wished he had. Wished for moments like this. Paul went quiet. Then carefully adjusted the mirrors, checked his blind spots, and put the car in drive with hands that barely shook. They spent 2 hours practicing parallel parking, 3-point turns, highway merging, all the practical skills driving school never quite covers. Carl was patient, encouraging, didn't yell once even when Paul almost hit a curb and came within inches of a light pole. On the drive home, Paul said, "This was good." Yeah? Yeah. Pause. We could do it again. If you want. I'd like that. They didn't hug. Didn't have some grand emotional moment worthy of a movie. Just drove home in comfortable silence while Paul asked if they could get burgers. And Carl said yes, before Paul even finished the sentence. That night, Paul invited Carl upstairs to see his editing setup. His room was small movie posters on the walls, desk covered in tech equipment, bed unmade in the way only teenage boys' beds can be. Normal teenage chaos. But his editing station was immaculate, professional, clearly his pride and joy, the thing he cared about most. I built this myself, Paul said, pulling up his latest project with visible pride. Saved for 2 years. Birthday money, summer jobs, everything. Carl studied the setup dual monitors, professional microphone, color grading software that cost more than most people's computers. This is impressive. Really impressive. You taught yourself all this? YouTube, online tutorials, trial and error. You want to make films, real ones, not just school projects. Yeah, how'd you know? Because I recognize passion when I see it. Carl's voice was soft. And you have it. Real talent combined with real drive. That's rare. Paul glanced at him. How do you know? You don't know anything about filmmaking. I know about passion, about building something from nothing, about having a vision and working until it's real. Carl met his eyes. And I can see it in you. Paul didn't respond, just pulled up a rough cut of his mom's interview and asked for feedback. They spent 45 minutes reviewing footage, Carl offering suggestions about pacing and emotional beats, Paul implementing them, both surprised by how naturally they worked together. How their minds moved in similar patterns, how they understood each other without having to explain. Downstairs, Angeline listened to their voices filtering through the ceiling. Laughter, discussion, The easy rhythm of two people finding common ground. Her eyes filled with tears. Not sad ones this time, just overwhelmed. Because her family was slowly, carefully, painfully knitting itself together. And it was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The following Wednesday, Carl showed up early. "I have a meeting downtown. Thought I'd bring coffee first." But when he walked in, Angeline was in the middle of cooking, attempting a recipe that clearly wasn't going well. "The sauce is splitting," she muttered, stirring frantically. "Why is it splitting? Let me see." Carl set down the coffees and moved beside her without thinking. "You cook?" "I lived alone for 16 years. I learned. YouTube is very educational." He examined the pot, adjusted the heat, added a splash of cream with the confidence of someone who'd made this mistake before. "Whisk it slowly. Don't let it boil. Low and slow." Angeline watched, stunned, as the sauce came together perfectly under his hands. "How did you?" "YouTube," Carl smiled. "I'm very good at learning things from YouTube now. It's become my primary education source." They cooked side by side, awkward at first, bumping elbows, apologizing too much, then gradually more comfortable. By the time Paul came down for breakfast, Carl was plating scrambled eggs while Angeline poured orange juice, and they were laughing about something from years. Paul stopped in the doorway. Watching them, this glimpse of what might have been, what maybe, impossibly, could still be. Over the next 2 weeks, Carl became a fixture. Not invasive, not demanding, not trying to buy his way into their lives with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Just present. He attended Paul's soccer games, sitting in the same spot in the bleachers, cheering at appropriate moments. Helped with homework when asked, admitting when he didn't know something rather than pretending expertise. Started volunteering at the community center where Angeline did outreach nursing, sorting donations, setting up equipment, staying in the background where he couldn't be accused of grandstanding. No press. No announcements. No billionaire savior narrative. Just quiet, consistent help. The kind that actually matters. Maya pulled Angeline aside one evening. "He's really trying." "I know. Are you going to forgive him?" Angeline was quiet, considering the question carefully. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I'm learning to trust him again. Slowly, carefully. Like learning to walk after an injury." "And Paul?" "Paul's figuring it out. They both are. It's messy and complicated, and there's no roadmap for this. There never is." 3 weeks after Carl started showing up, Paul came across an article during lunch at school. Robinson Tech CEO faces board rebellion over paternity scandal. He read it with growing shock, stomach sinking. The board had demanded Carl deny paternity until DNA confirmation. Demanded he protect the company first. Carl had refused. Had publicly acknowledged Paul as his son despite the backlash, the stock dip, the investor concerns. Had chosen truth over profit. Had chosen Paul over everything. That evening, when Carl showed up for dinner, Paul was quieter than usual. After they ate, Paul followed Carl to his car. Hands shoved in his pockets. "I read something today." Carl tensed. "Okay. About the board, how they wanted you to deny I was yours, how the stock dropped, how investors were threatening to pull out." Carl's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me." Paul's voice was firm. "You could have protected yourself, your company, your reputation, but you didn't. You're my son. I'm not protecting myself from the truth anymore. I'm done lying, done hiding, done choosing everything except what matters." Paul stared at him for a long moment. Then, "I have an arts showcase next Friday. For my video project, the one about Mom." Carl's breath caught. "Yeah? Can you come?" "It's at 7. In the auditorium. There'll be a lot of people. And it might be awkward and—" "I wouldn't miss it," Carl whispered, voice thick with emotion. Paul nodded. Started to walk away. Then turned back. "Thanks. For showing up. Every day. Even when I'm difficult and angry. And you don't have to thank me for doing what I should have done from the beginning." "Maybe not." Paul's voice was soft. "But I'm thanking you anyway." He went inside. And Carl sat in his car, hands shaking, heart pounding. Because his son had just invited him to something that mattered. Had trusted him to show up. And Carl would die before he let him down again. This is the part of the story that always gets me. Not the big dramatic moments, not the confrontations, or the tears. But these small moments, the breakfast muffins, the driving lessons, the invitation to a school event. Because this is how healing actually happens, isn't it? Not in one big cinematic moment, but in 1,000 small choices to show up, to try, to keep choosing each other, even when it's hard. If you're rooting for Carl and Paul, if you want to see whether this fragile connection can survive what comes next, make sure you're everything they've built. And what happens when Paul stands on that stage and tells their story to a room full of strangers? Tell me, what's the smallest gesture someone made that showed you they cared? Sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that matter most. Let's see if Carl can keep his promise. The auditorium at Lincoln High smelled like floor polish and nervous energy and teenage ambition. 300 seats filled rapidly, students, parents, teachers, a few local journalists who'd somehow gotten wind that Paul Henson would be presenting tonight. The same Paul Henson whose viral video had sparked a national conversation. The same Paul Henson whose billionaire father had caused a media firestorm. Everyone wanted to see what he'd created next. Carl arrived at 6:42 p.m., 18 minutes early. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans. Angeline had told him not to show up looking like a corporate robot who's slumming it, and stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure where to sit, feeling more nervous than he had before any board meeting. Angeline appeared beside him, equally nervous in a burgundy dress, Paul said. Made her look like a real person instead of someone who lives in scrubs. You came, she said. Paul invited me. I know, She paused. Part of me expected you to get called away. Board meeting. Investor crisis. Something urgent that only the CEO could handle. Carl's jaw tightened. I told you. I'm done choosing everything else first. Paul matters more than any meeting. More than any deal. More than protecting my image. Their eyes met. And for the first time in 16 years, Angeline saw conviction instead of fear. Let's sit, she said quietly. They found seats in the middle section, not front row where people would stare and whisper, not back row where they could hide, somewhere in between. Like everything else in their lives now. The auditorium filled quickly. Students clustered in groups. Parents compared notes about college applications. Teachers organized presentation order. But the whispers that mattered most, all centered on Carl. That's him, the billionaire. I heard he didn't even know Paul existed until like a month ago. Didn't he just show up after the video went viral? My mom said he's trying to buy his way into Paul's life. No, I heard he actually comes to soccer practices and everything. Still weird though. Where was he for 16 years? Carl heard every word. Felt them land like tiny cuts, each one a reminder of his failures. Angeline must have sensed his discomfort because her hand suddenly covered his. Not romantic. Not even particularly warm. Just there. Anchoring him. Reminding him he wasn't alone. Carl's throat tightened. Thank you. They don't know the full story. They're just noise. Let them talk. What if Paul regrets inviting me? Then he'll tell you. Angeline's voice was firm. But he invited you for a reason. Trust that. Trust him. The lights dimmed before Carl could respond. Principal Hayes took the stage. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our annual arts showcase, where our students present multimedia projects, exploring themes of identity, growth, and human connection. Polite applause. Hayes continued through the program. 6 presentations before Paul's. A girl's photo essay about immigration. A boy's documentary about his grandmother's dementia. A spoken word piece about identity. Carl barely registered any of them. His leg bounced anxiously. His hands were clammy. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, our next presenter is Paul Henson, with his project titled, The Man I Didn't Know I Needed. The auditorium went completely silent. You could hear breathing. Carl's heart stopped. Paul walked onto the stage. Confident, composed, terrifyingly vulnerable. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Carl and Angeline. 3 months ago, I made a video that went viral. I talked about growing up without a father and wondering why I wasn't enough. His voice was steady, strong. Millioned in the process, my father, who I'd never met, found out I existed. The audience was riveted, leaning forward. This project is about what happened after. About second chances. About learning that sometimes people don't leave because you're not enough. They leave because they don't know how to stay. Paul pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up, and Carl's world tilted on its axis. The video opened with home footage, grainy, old, clearly shot on a phone camera. Paul as a toddler, laughing in a park. Angeline pushing him on a swing, young and tired, and smiling. Paul's voiceover. "This is my mom and me. This is how I grew up. Just us. And for a long time, I thought that made us incomplete." More footage. Paul's first day of kindergarten. Wearing a backpack, almost as big as he was. Christmas mornings, with modest presents. Birthday parties in their small apartment. Always Angeline. Never a father. For 16 years, I wondered who my dad was. I made up stories, hero narratives, anything to explain his absence, anything to make it hurt less. The footage shifted. Paul at 12, accepting a soccer trophy, looking into the crowd, face falling when he didn't find who he was searching for. The truth was harder than fiction. My father wasn't a hero. He was just a scared kid who ran from responsibility because he didn't know how to handle it. Carl's vision blurred. The screen showed the thumbnail that started everything. Paul and Carl side by side, faces so similar it was impossible to deny. Then, I made a video. And the internet did what it does, it exposed the truth, before anyone was ready for it. Footage now of news coverage. Headlines. The viral confrontation on the porch that Mrs. Chen had recorded. I was angry, hurt, betrayed. How dare he show up 16 years late? Paul paused the video, stepped forward on the stage, spoke directly to the audience without the safety of the screen. But then, something unexpected happened. He didn't leave. He showed up every morning, came to my soccer games, helped with homework, made breakfast with my mom, just existed in our lives without demanding anything, without expecting instant forgiveness. The video resumed. New footage now shot over the past 3 weeks. Carl at the kitchen table, laughing at something Paul said, genuine joy on his face. Carl in the bleachers at soccer practice, focused entirely on the field, ignoring his constantly buzzing phone. Carl and Paul in the car, Paul behind the wheel, both smiling nervously at each other. And I realized, maybe some dads weren't taught how to stay. Maybe their own fathers showed them that love was weakness, that success meant sacrifice, that choosing family was failure. The screen showed a photo of Carl's father, stern, cold, corporate, everything wrong with masculinity, distilled into one image. Paul's voiceover. My grandfather threatened my mom when she was pregnant. Told her he'd take me away if she ever contacted my dad. That's the man who raised him. That's what my father was taught about love. That's the example he had. Gasps rippled through the audience. Carl's hands clenched, knuckles white. So when my father finally learned I existed, he had a choice. Keep running, or learn a different way. Choose fear, or choose us. The video showed Carl helping at the community center, sorting donations, setting up tables, no cameras, no press, no credit seeking. Just quiet service. He chose different. Footage of Carl teaching Paul to drive, both of them laughing when Paul stalled the car, the moment turning from embarrassment to connection. He chose to show up. Footage of Carl and Angeline in the kitchen, building something that had been broken. He chose us. The final image, Paul and Carl sitting on the porch steps, not touching, not hugging, just existing together in comfortable silence. Paul's face filled the screen. My father missed 16 years of my life. That's a fact. Nothing changes that. No amount of breakfast muffins or driving lessons or soccer games can give me back what I lost. Pause. The audience held its breath. But he's here now, trying. Failing sometimes, learning, but showing up every single day. And maybe that's what matters. Not perfection, but presence. Not erasing the past, but building a different future. The screen faded to black. Paul's final words appeared in white text. Maybe some dads just needed a second chance. Maybe second chances are how we heal. The auditorium was silent for 3 full seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. Standing ovation. Teachers crying. Students on their feet. Parents wiping their eyes. But Carl wasn't watching the audience. He was staring at his son, this brilliant, brave, impossibly gracious boy, and breaking apart completely. Tears streaming, shoulders shaking, decades of buried emotion pouring out in a way he'd never allowed before. Paul stepped off the stage, walked directly to Carl, weaving through the crowd. The audience fell silent again, watching. Paul stood there, uncertain, this huge decision weighing on him. Carl stood too, wiping his face, trying to compose himself, and failing completely. Paul, don't. Paul's voice cracked. Just, he stepped forward and hugged his father. Awkward, trembling, arms not quite sure where to go, but real. So completely real. Carl's arms wrapped around his son, this child he'd never held as a baby, never comforted through nightmares, never taught to ride a bike. And he held on like Paul might disappear if he let go. "I'm sorry," Carl whispered into Paul's hair. "I'm so sorry for everything, for every moment I missed, for every—" "I know." Paul's voice was muffled against Carl's shoulder. "I know you are, and I'm starting to believe it." They stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 seconds. When they pulled apart, both were crying. The audience erupted again, louder this time. Angeline was openly sobbing now, hands over her mouth, mascara running. Paul turned to her, pulled her into the hug too. And for the first time ever, the three of them stood together. Not a family yet, that would take time. But the beginning of one. The foundation. The possibility. After the showcase ended, and students dispersed, Carl and Angeline walked toward the parking lot. Paul had stayed behind with friends, accepting congratulations, soaking in the moment he'd earned. "He's incredible," Carl said quietly. "You raised someone extraordinary. Someone kind and talented and brave enough to forgive the unforgivable." "We raised him," Angeline corrected gently. "You just weren't there to see it. But you're here now. And that matters to him." Carl flinched. "Fair?" They walked in silence for a moment, the night air cool on their faces. Then Angeline's hand found his. Not holding, just brushing, connecting. "This doesn't fix everything," she said quietly. "I know. We still have a long way to go. Months, maybe years. I know that too. But tonight," her voice softened, "tonight was good. Tonight was healing." Carl squeezed her hand gently. "Yeah, it was." They walked to their separate cars. But before driving away, Carl looked back at the auditorium. His son was inside, laughing with classmates, living the life Carl had missed but was now part of. Finally. And he wasn't running anymore. And there it is, the moment we've been building toward. Not a perfect reunion, not everything fixed with one video and one hug, but real progress, real healing. You know what I love most about this story? It's honest. It doesn't pretend that showing up for a few weeks erases 16 years. It doesn't give us a fairy tale ending where everyone immediately forgives and forgets. It gives us something better. The truth. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth of what it looks like when broken people try to heal. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Angeline's strength or Paul's pain, or somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that second chances are possible, that families can rebuild, that it's never too late to show bell. Because these stories, these real, raw, honest stories about women who survived, children who thrived, and people who learned to forgive, this is what our community is built on. We're not just watching stories, we're healing together. 3 months after the showcase, Carl's mornings looked different. Instead of waking in a penthouse, overlooking the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture, he woke in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, 6 blocks from Angeline's place, close enough to be present, far enough to respect boundaries. His morning started at 6:30 a.m. with coffee he made himself, not ordered from an assistant. By 7:15, he was at Angeline's door, with breakfast from the bakery Paul loved. By 7:30, he was at the kitchen table while Paul inhaled pancakes and complained about calculus homework that made no sense. This was his routine now, and it felt more like success than any board meeting ever had. More meaningful than any deal he'd ever closed. More valuable than the billions in his bank account. The first time Paul introduced him as "my dad" happened on a Tuesday at the grocery store. They were shopping together. Carl had insisted on coming along after Paul mentioned Angeline worked a double shift when they ran into Marcus Chen, Paul's soccer teammate. "Hey Paul, you coming to Jake's party Friday?" "Maybe. Depends on." Paul glanced at Carl. "Depends on if my dad needs help with something this weekend." The word landed casually, effortlessly, like it had always belonged there. Like it wasn't the most significant thing Carl had ever heard. Marcus didn't even blink. "Cool, let me know." After he left, Carl stood frozen in the cereal aisle, gripping the shopping cart with white knuckles. "You okay?" Paul asked. "You called me your dad." Paul shrugged, suddenly self-conscious, ears turning red. "I mean, you are, technically." "No, Carl's voice caught. "Thank you. Don't make it weird." "Too late. It's already weird. I'm crying in the cereal aisle." "Then stop." "Can't. You called me your dad." "Oh my God." Paul walked away, but Carl could see him smiling. They finished shopping in comfortable silence. But when Carl dropped Paul home, Paul lingered at the car door, hand on the handle. "For what it's worth," Paul said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes, "you're getting pretty good at this." "At what?" "Being a dad." Then he was gone, jogging up the steps before Carl could respond. Carl sat in his car for 10 minutes, crying quietly, pathetically grateful for 6 words. "You're getting pretty good at this." Carl and Angeline's relationship evolved slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust after betrayal, like walking on ice that might crack. At first, their interactions were purely functional, coordinating Paul's schedule, discussing school events, navigating co-parenting despite having no legal framework for it, no template to follow. But gradually, something shifted. Carl started staying for dinner more often. Angeline stopped tensing when he entered the room. They fell into patterns. Carl washing dishes while Angeline dried. Angeline making coffee the way Carl liked it without asking. Carl remembering to buy the specific brand of tea she preferred from the international market. Small domesticities that felt significant. Ordinary miracles. One evening, after Paul went upstairs to edit a video, Angeline and Carl found themselves alone on the porch, the place where everything had fallen apart and was now slowly rebuilding. "This is strange," Angeline said. "What is?" "This, us. Having a normal conversation without 16 years of resentment, suffocating everything, without every word feeling like a weapon." Carl smiled softly. "Is the resentment gone?" "Not gone, just..." She paused, searching for words. "Quieter, more manageable, less likely to explode at any moment." "I'll take manageable." They sat in silence, watching the street, listening to evening sounds, kids playing, cars passing, life continuing. Then Angeline spoke again. "I'm not ready to forgive you completely. I don't know if I ever will be. The wounds run too deep. I understand. But I'm learning to forgive the version of you that exists now. The one who shows up, who tries, who puts Paul first, who's become the man I always hoped you could be." Carl's throat tightened. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably." Angeline's smile was sad but genuine. "But Paul deserves a father, and you're becoming one. So I'm choosing to let that matter more than the past. For his sake. Maybe someday for mine too." "Angeline. Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't make promises. Don't apologize again. Just keep showing up. That's all I'm asking. That's all that matters now." "I will." "I know." She stood, brushed invisible dust from her jeans. "That's why this is working." She went inside. And Carl sat there, marveling at the fact that working was even a possibility. That after everything, they were finding a way forward. The family dinner happened on a Friday night in late spring. Paul had aced his calculus final. Angeline had gotten a promotion to head nurse, with a significant raise. Carl had successfully negotiated keeping his CEO position despite board pressure, and had restructured to make time for family. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Things worth celebrating. Angeline cooked her grandmother's pasta recipe that she only made for special occasions. Carl brought wine for the adults, sparkling cider for Paul, flowers for Angeline, just because. They sat around the small kitchen table that barely fit 3 people, plates overlapping, elbows bumping, laughter filling spaces that used to hold silence and pain. "So, I got an email from NYU, Paul said, twirling pasta on his fork, "about their film program." Angeline's eyes widened. "And? They want to see more of my work," said the showcase video was compelling and demonstrates mature emotional intelligence, and they'd consider it as part of my portfolio. "Paul, that's incredible." Angeline grabbed his hand, squeezing tight. Carl felt his chest swell with pride, so intense it was almost painful. "When do you have to submit?" "October. I have time to make something new, something better. Something that matters beyond just us." "The showcase video was already perfect," Carl said. Paul shook his head. "It was personal. But I want to make something that matters to people who don't know our story. Something about, I don't know, second chances, forgiveness, healing, real stuff that helps people. Angeline smiled. You'll figure it out. You always do. They ate in easy silence for a moment, the comfortable kind that comes from familiarity. Then Paul set down his fork. I'm glad you found us. The words were quiet, simple, but they detonated in Carl's chest like a bomb. Paul, I mean it. Paul's eyes were serious now, carrying weight. I know it took 17 million people and a viral video, and the internet basically forcing you to acknowledge me. But you came, and you stayed. And, his voice cracked. I'm glad you did. I'm glad I know you now. Carl couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. His eyes were too blurry. Angeline's eyes filled with tears, too. I'm glad too, Carl finally managed, voice thick. Gladder than I've ever been about anything in my entire life. Even Robinson Tech going public? Paul teased, trying to lighten the moment. Especially that. Carl's voice was fierce, certain. I'd give it all back, every dollar, every success, every moment of professional achievement, if it meant I got to be here from the beginning. If it meant I never missed a single day of your life. But you're here now, Paul said quietly. That's what matters. Not the time we lost. The time we're building. Angeline reached across the table, took Carl's hand in a way she hadn't in 16 years. Not with pain this time. Not with resentment or obligation or fear. But with something that looked dangerously close to hope. Close to forgiveness. Close to love, rebuilt from ashes. Carl squeezed back. And for the first time in 16 years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 2 weeks later, Paul set up his camera in the living room. Same angle as the first video that started everything. Same lighting. Same nervous energy. But everything else was different. Behind him, Angeline and Carl were in the kitchen, cooking dinner together, laughing about something, moving around each other with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, who'd found a way to coexist. Paul adjusted the camera, cleared his throat, and pressed record. 3 months ago, I made a video that changed my life. I talked about absent fathers and wondered why mine never wanted to know me. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Turns out, he did. He just didn't know I existed. And when he found out when the internet forced the truth into the light, he had a choice. Run like he did before. Or stay and do the hard work of building something from nothing. In the background, Carl said something that made Angeline laugh. The sound, light, and genuine. Paul continued. This video is about what happened after. About second chances. About learning that people aren't just their worst moments. They're also their best attempts at redemption. Their daily choices. Their consistency. Their willingness to show up even when it's hard. The camera captured everything. Paul in the foreground, speaking directly to the lens. Carl and Angeline in the background, living proof that broken things could heal if you were willing to do the work. My father missed 16 years of my life. He made terrible choices. He ran when he should have stayed. He built an empire while my mom built a home for me. Those are facts. Those hurt. That damage is real. Paul's voice steadied, growing stronger. But when he finally learned I existed, he showed up. Every single day. He didn't buy my forgiveness with expensive gifts, or try to skip the hard parts. He earned it, slowly. Through soccer games and driving lessons, and terrible dad jokes, and just being there. Being present, being consistent. Behind him, Carl plated food while Angeline set the table, their movements synchronized. Normal, domestic, beautiful in its simplicity. I don't know if our story is inspirational or just messy. Probably both. But I know this. Second chances only work if both people show up. If the person who messed up does the work. And if the person who was hurt allows space for change, for growth, for the possibility that people can become better than they were. Paul glanced over his shoulder at his parents, both of them now, in different ways but equally important. I didn't know the man in the thumbnail was my dad. I didn't know a viral video would reunite us. I didn't know forgiveness was possible, or that healing could happen, or that broken families could rebuild. His voice softened. But I'm glad the world saw him. Because it forced him to see me. And sometimes that's all it takes, being seen. Really seen, for everything to change. For healing to begin. For love to find a way forward. Behind Paul, Carl and Angeline called him for dinner, their voices blending. Paul smiled at the camera, genuine and peaceful. My name is Paul Henson, and this is my family. Messy, imperfect, hard-won, but mine. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. He reached forward and stopped recording. That video never went viral. It didn't need to. It wasn't meant for millions. It was meant for Paul. For his healing. For his story. Paul submitted it with his NYU application alongside a personal essay about redemption and family and the possibility of second chances. 6 months later, he got his acceptance letter. Full scholarship. Carl cried when Paul told him, tears of pride and joy. Angeline threw a party at the community center, small, intimate, just the people who mattered. And when someone asked Paul how it felt to have his father back, he said simply, "It feels like I finally understand what I was missing. And I'm grateful I don't have to miss it anymore." 1 year later, Carl still showed up every morning. Paul was in New York now, studying film, sending videos home weekly, thriving in ways that made Carl's chest tight with pride. But when he visited for holidays and breaks, Carl was there at the airport, waiting, beaming with pride, holding a ridiculous welcome sign. Paul pretended to be embarrassed by, but secretly loved. Angeline and Carl weren't together romantically. Maybe they never would be. Too much water under that bridge. Too much history. But they were partners in raising Paul, in building something new from the wreckage of what was. And, some nights, when Paul called them both on FaceTime from his dorm room, they'd crowd around the phone together laughing, teasing, asking about classes and friends and projects. A family. Not the one they'd planned. Not the one they'd imagined. But the one they'd fought for. The one they'd earned. And that made it real. That made it worth everything. Final frame, Paul's editing screen in his NYU dorm. His cursor hovers over the final cut of a new project. The title card reads, "Why Second Chances Matter," a film by Paul Henson. Underneath, a dedication. For my mom, who never gave up. For my dad, who learned to show up. For everyone still figuring out how to forgive. And for anyone who needs to know, it's never too late to build a family. Paul saves the file, closes his laptop, and smiles. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones that go viral. They're the ones that heal. The ones that remind us we're all just doing our best. The ones that prove redemption is possible. And the ones that show us love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up. Every single day.